What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here, and patch 10.25b is already live. They put the patch notes out the same time the changes hit the servers, so by the time you're watching this video, these champions have already been changed, and they kind of hid the notes inside of the current 10.25 patch notes, so, I wouldn't be surprised if y'all don't really see it in time. Just wanted to say, hey, everyone, real quick. I hope you're all doing well. California is so swamped with COVID. I'm not going to see my family for Christmas, which makes me kind of sad. Actually, I've been kind of morose all day, but I appreciate y'all. I like doing this kind of stuff. So, thanks for helping to keep me sane a little bit, because it's kind of the first time COVID's been tough on me, and it's kind of tough. Anyway, 10.25b is happening. It's a pretty small patch overall, so let's get into it. 25, by the way, the 2-hour-long rundown that it was, and almost deservedly so, had a lot of really big changes, and some of them were definitely, it turned out overcorrections. Champions that were, underpowered or slightly balanced became super OP. Champs that were super OP became really problematically weak, and so there's a lot of walkbacks, and it seems, so there's a lot of walkbacks and a lot of, fairly small changes here in this patch, but all of them seem fairly good. So unfortunately, we don't get the cool graphic that we got from 0.25, but we'll read their context statements as kind of the evidence of why they did stuff. So as promised, we're doing a last round of balance changes. Yeah, this is by the way, this is 7 days after the previous patch came out. Actually, it's 6, because technically the notes came out 7 days ago, but the changes actually hit live, at least for America, 6 days ago, 6.5, something like that. Anyway, yeah, so Akali was a big winner. Her win rate climbed quite a bit. I know one big thing that Riot was really concerned about, and I'm going to, spend a little bit of time talking about this. One thing that Riot considered doing in the preseason update in 23 was changing spell vamp or omni vamp in general, vamp off of abilities, call it what you want, to be, instead of 1/3 effective on AoE abilities, it was going to be 1/3 effective on minions. And what they decided, and I think this is actually a fair point. So first of all, why I think it would be good is because it would kind of make sense, right? You always heal during team fights, when it's actually contentious. You don't just heal to full off of a minion wave, because minions don't fight back, but champions do. So, vamp, in the current state of League of Legends, kind of just becomes a top off between waves thing and isn't necessarily as interesting in team fights. And that's a fair point. What they decided on, though, and this is, I think, fair as well and totally reasonable, is that, well, look, part of what makes assassins workable and what helps them actually win against tanks, because if your assassin can't split push, why play an assassin literally ever? Because they're generally weaker team fighters than tanks, for example. If you can't heal up off of waves in between fights, why play the champion at all? And I think that was actually a fair point. And so it's why, Ravenous Hunter is still pretty solid, and, you have things like Riftmaker and whatnot for Omnivamp, and there's other runes for it. So ultimately, yeah, that felt kind of true, that it was correct. But there's obviously some concern as well, whoa, if Gunblade's gone, is Akali still going to be okay? Turns out, yes. Anyway, Akali did end up being a pretty big winner, of course, because there's a lot more good items without mana on them, which is a pretty big deal overall, right? Your builds cannot include mana, so Akali doing pretty well. So she's losing 10% move speed when using Assassin's Mark, when running around her ring, or getting the spinning comma in her hands, and also 10 flat damage off the passive damage as well. Now, what's nice is I'm actually a very big fan of this being the change. So, Akali will never not be a skillful champion, right? She's simply too tricksy to not be skillful and rewarding player skill. I am a fan, though, as much as you can, of flattening that a little bit, right? Or at least finding ways to say, look, if the really good Akalis are too strong, find the skillful damage abilities to nerf and leave the easy damage abilities. This is not to say, I want this champion to be old Malzahar, where everything is point and click and you just die for free. I'm just saying that this is a balance change that nerfs really good Akalis more than it nerfs really bad Akalis, which I am generally a big fan of, and so I like this. And the passive is somewhat hard to use. The passive's reliability is down a little bit with less movement speed. The passive damage is down quite obviously, and I would argue the passive is harder to use than the Q or the E or the R. You hit the skill shot on the guy, it's fine, but Q, back up, walk forward, auto attack, E, run back in, auto attack, right? That's much more difficult to do, and so I'm a fan of this being where the nerf is. I will say that this still feels like a totally reasonable amount of damage, all things considered, but just, worth pointing out. And so here's quick numbers on this one as we shoot ourselves with brightness. The total move speed of Akali is down about 7% at all points in time. I can probably add a decimal here just to make it a bit more obvious, but yeah, it's down 3% and then eventually down 4% in the end game. Down 7% and then down 6% at the end game. That's the actual numbers there. And then the passive damage, obviously, it must include the basic auto attack, so that's rounded into the damage here. So 101 to 299 becomes 91 to 289. Certainly, still the pass was very, very good. Sure, the additive damage is a consideration there as well. Sure, the AP ratio being down by 20% means this nerf. Obviously, the 10 flat damage means more in the early game, but in terms of the AP ratio mattering, that's going to be, more of a late game focus, right? So, you're eventually your damage roughly triples. I mean, that's still kind of true, and so if you can, get another 300 damage through AP, then, your nerf is about as big on the AP scaling. So, solid mid-sized nerf. Akali is not like absurdly overtuned, but she's a champion who honestly is. She's an assassin. She is frustrating to play against. Her ban rate in ultra high elo is exceptionally high. Her win rate overall is honestly reasonable, but this is League of Legends. It's a PvP game, really. Even games in general, your whole point of balancing a game is to balance enjoyment, not actual theoretical balance level. People are not enjoying getting hit by Akali, so Akali gets to sit, as most assassins do, at an underpowered state. Next up is Anivia, who certainly got a bit too good overall with the most recent patch. A lot of big buffs there, so they're walking back some of the E damage here. This is still very, very aggressive scaling. You're certainly going to max it first. The mana cost up by 10. Anivia is one of the strongest champions in League of Legends right now, and so you get a pretty small. Obviously, the mana cost is just simply up by 25%. That's an easy one, not a problem there, but the damage is down moderately. Just because I'm keeping my sort of bookkeeping going on, the AP ratio on this ability is still very, very, very aggressive. They didn't nerf the AP ratio, so you're not really nerfing her late game damage that much, but you are, of course, nerfing her early lane bullying by your ability doing 10 less damage flat. Next up is Galio. Galio's another champion who is exceptionally good in high elo, and they're trying to find ways to nerf high MMR Galio. And so what they're doing is a 2 to 4 second nerf on the W. This is, I believe, more of a nerf to support Galio, since support Galio, I believe, would max W first. That said, most of the gameplay is in mid Galio, and most of his win rate is in mid Galio. Sorry, support Galio, you get kind of screwed here. Such is life. But they're trying to, nerf abilities that good players are good at using, and so really, really effective taunts are going to be a little bit less done. Galio maxes W second. I don't believe that will change because E's rank up is pretty meaningless, and so ultimately, here's where we are, where the cooldown is up pretty substantially, honestly, right? In the early game, it's a solid 13%, which isn't a huge deal, but it's going to matter some. But your late game cooldown, 13 plus on Galio is pretty reasonable to reach in a game of League of Legends. Getting 1/3 longer on the cooldown is going to be felt. So, there should be a solid, over 1% win rate nerf to Galio, and somewhat fair. Gangplank, slightly on the weak side, isn't quite where he wants to be. Triforce doesn't exactly line up with what he wants to do. He actually liked the mana on it, for example, and I think he did get mana per level as compensation, but still, Gangplank isn't using the auto attack speed stuff, and I don't actually know what Gangplank's best mythic is. It may actually be lethality. I didn't actually look into this, but I trust Gangplank's not doing so great, so they're going to give him base AD growth of 1. Here is his attack damage before and after. We continue the chain of lots of fighters having, 130 or so attack damage, which I think is fine. And, this does cool things, right? So obviously his base AD matters. It's just how much damage he does with auto attacks. It funnels into his Q when he pops up barrels, right? Like every offensive action he ever does is based off his total AD. So compared to someone like, say, Aurelia, right, where her passive and her E and her R, those all have flat damages that aren't scaled. Gangplank's ultimate, to be fair, yes, also does have magic damage and doesn't have an 80 scaling on it, so that is there to a certain extent. But again, the fact that Gangplank's primary damage output all directly references his total attack damage means this is a bigger buff on someone like Gangplank than it is on maybe another champion. I will say a lot of fighters, check your total AD when they do stuff, so it's still fairly frequent, but it's still a bigger deal on Gangplank than most. And again, also being a Sheen user, this directly amps the damage of Sheen and Sheen's upgrades. So this is a pretty meaningful buff. Gangplank's going to feel this quite a lot. Obviously, he wants to side land a lot. He's going to gain a lot of levels. He's a pure solo laner. So yeah, this will be useful. This will be effective, and Gangplank will gain quite a bit. Next up, we have Kane, who's getting 2 of the 3 nerfs reverted. I will say that the biggest of the 3 nerfs is the one that they are keeping. So, I mean, Kane lost, I want to say, like 6 or 7% win rate last patch, and so they're walking back about half of the nerfs from the patch before. So what I'm just pasting down here is how big the nerfs were a week ago, right? So he had lost to 2.2 to 1.5% physical durability. He's getting all of that back. The Q damage, unless you were Red Kane, like once you were Red Kane, you overwrote this anyway. And I'm glad, by the way, this is what got overwrote here. Like that this one got changed, not the cooldown change. This, I think, probably helps you make sure you kill raptors in the same number of Qs, which is certainly meaningful. And again, it's Blue Kane has been weaker than Red Kane for the entire history of like this year. And so I said this in the last patch rundown, like I felt bad about there being a nerf that affected Blue Kane more than Red Kane, so I'm glad this is getting reverted. The Q cooldown itself, I would argue Q cooldown in and of itself is more of a Red Kane nerf than a Blue Kane nerf. Because Blue Kane nerf so often is going to one-shot his target anyway, and then live in the target for a long time and then wait for Q cooldown and then come back out. Red Kane actually takes a lot longer fights and thus will get 2, 3, 4, 5 Qs off in a battle with high haste. So I'm glad this is the nerf that's being kept. I think it's the best of the nerfs to keep, to be clear. So yep, good on you, Riot. Just for consistency's sake, I would not mind mana regen nerfs on Kane just because the numbers are too high. Just because it's out of nowhere, it's just too high. I don't know. It's a random point. It doesn't have to matter, but I don't like inconsistency if I can help it. Regardless, yeah, this nerf is, of course, kept over. This damage nerf and this durability nerf are getting reverted, and that means Kane should be in a totally strong spot literally right now. Next up, Malphite loses 4.1 armor, and I like this nerf a lot. I've mentioned a couple times, I've come around to the idea of, I don't think we need to standardize champions' armor and MR exactly. I do still think champions should have a total budget of armor and MR. And so anytime there's a champion with high armor who receives an MR nerf or, has these numbers shift back and forth, I'm actually pretty happy about this. So another champion with non-standard magic resist, I think is totally reasonable. One thing that is a little weird is Malphite has 28 plus 1.25. So his MR starts low, but then ends higher than champions like Misfortune. That part to me feels a bit weird. I would actually like if growth more closely matched baseline, that these were kept in some degree of normalcy, but it's not a big deal regardless. This is still a pretty solid nerf. Again, wouldn't have minded this be 28 plus 1 or 28 plus 0.75 or something. Again, not a huge deal. End of the day, Malphite is still going to have less MR than every other melee champion, I think, in the game. Maybe Kale is less, but whatever. So yeah, I think this is, and if you feel Kale is ranged from 6 onwards regardless. So this is a good change. I like this in theory. I think it makes sense for who Malphite is as a champion. Of note, Malphite already is pretty heavily skewed in terms of win rate of anti-physical versus anti-magic. So if you look at things like what types of boots Malphite buys, his win rate with plated steel caps is like 2% higher than his win rate with Merc Treads. Because when you pick a Malphite into Darius, it's a lot better than picking Malphite into Kennen. Duh, right? And when the enemy team is 4 AD, you're going to feel really good about being Malphite. When the team is 4 Magic, you feel bad about being Malphite. So Malphite is already weak in magic damage lineups and already very, very good in physical damage lineups. Now, that's fine. I think that Riot is continuing to push Malphite into being more and more situational. Clearly, he's one of the best performing champions in League of Legends, one of the best performing top laners overall. And I want to be clear, even in games where Malphite is building Merc Treads, he is still above 50% win rate, right? And yeah, there's more tank nerfs coming on. There's Sunfire Aegis nerf down the line in this patch, but clearly Malphite is OP even in magic damage compositions. And so that means, yeah, there's room to go here, to bring Malphite down overall, but also to bring Malphite down in AP matchups. Clearly, this champion's meant to be situational, at least skewed one way. I mean, it's so obviously built into the kit with an attack speed slow, with armor scaling and all that stuff. Like, it makes total sense. So, again, good to see this. Pretty moderate nerf overall. Even in, heavy AD compositions, you're still going to have, oftentimes 20%, 30% magic damage out of the enemy lineup. And so that means that, you're still taking, 3% bonus damage on 20% of the opposing team's damage output. And of course, sometimes it's even more. So good nerf. I like it a lot. Fixed a bug where struts attack do not complete the rank. That's a pretty big deal. You're good bug fix here as well. Good job, MF. Okay, great. Let's move on. Olaf, another champion who is doing too well. And so this is 4 to 0% slow taken off of the queue, which is pretty small, but it is a fairly meaningful early game nerf. And then the Vicious Strike's attack speed is nerfed by 5% as well. So 2 fairly small nerfs on Olaf. I am happy to see this, though. Instead of just cutting 4% off flat and having this be 25 to 41, it's no, we're going to go back to, nice, clean scaling by 5s. I dig this. I do. This is cool. I'm a fan. And then the attack speed down as well. So here is the amount of slow difference. You max Q first, so from level 9 onwards, late game Olaf is not really any different. But champions move 6, 4, 3, 2% faster in the early game. That's pretty reasonable. So, small dueling nerfs in the early game. The one that matters a bit more is just the 5% attack speed nerf on the W. You max it last, so you're not getting multiple points in until 14 plus, which is down here. This is when it starts to kind of fall off in terms of what the nerf even means. But you're basically just at a flat 3% nerf for a long time, and eventually it's a 2% nerf. Olaf does not really buy more attack speed. I want to point out that his passive attack speed, the more AS when you're low on health, is a multiplicative with all other sources. So this number remains true regardless of how much or how little health Olaf has remaining. It is still this much less. Overall, yeah. Couple modern nerfs to attack speed and slows to Olaf means he will still be on the strong side. If you like playing Olaf and you're winning with Olaf, you will still win with Olaf. He's just slightly less good. This technically, yes, indeed, does nerf his clear speed slightly. Right? Again, this means more early game, so you will, have a couple seconds added, a second or something added to your overall clear. It's not going to be a huge deal, but you can feel that to a certain degree. Again, not going to be a huge problem. He's still going to be fine. Couple of bug fixes here. This is a... there's weird copy-paste errors. Okay. I know what's going on here. All right, so yeah, nice little change to Rel. Your E doesn't accidentally self-cast. That's a good change. Collector no longer does weird things with champion death passives. Great. Iron Spike Whip fixed a bug where the whip and items they can build in 2 cooldown reduced to 0 when moving item slots in the inventory. Ooh, that's obviously a problem. And then this is not what you think it is. This is Hurricane got changed. So Hurricane in the preseason update, in fact, it's on different lines. So we're going to go here first, okay? So in the preseason update, Hurricane lost 5 crit chance, as all the upgrades did, and it gained 25 AD, and it cost 800 more gold than before, which means it really gained 600 gold in stats. It also lost 2 move speed, and it got plus 800 in cost. But the compensation for that was, even though you're paying 200 more for the total stat package, is you got Wind's Fury, which is pretty exciting, and it meant that later into the game, Hurricane would do more and more and more damage, up to 70% more bolt damage. And considering this item, right, gave you optimally 80% more damage, and instead then gave you up to 140% more damage, that's worth paying 200 gold for, right? 30% more damage Hurricane bolts is a pretty big deal. In some cases, you are, doubling this passive, and it's only costing you 200 more gold for it. That seems reasonable. Now, of course, it's not how it really works because you're stacking things like Callista Spears and, everything else is going on. But, if you're Jinx or Aphelios, all you're getting out of that is damage. But if you're Callista, it's different. Either way, it turns out that, it just felt way, way, way too bad to have to buy a Mythic and then 3,400 more gold for your champion to come online for, Jinx, Aphelios, Kalista being the 3 primary ones. It felt too bad to power spike so late. And again, they did objectively nerf the item in the early game, right? This item is objectively weaker than before when you buy it because, the scaling starts at level 10, I'm pretty sure, right? So that's just like pretty weak overall. So here's the new version of the item. And this is kind of rounding in everything else, right? So again, we still lost 5% crit chance. We still lost 2% move speed out of the item. And that's what this maths out to, is 280 gold worth of stats, went down the drain from these changes. But it is cheaper than before the season as well. And here we are. So I want to point out that Hurricane is, technically nerfed from before the season, right? From before even preseason, from 10.22 or 21 or 20 or whatever. This item is still, in fact, a fair bit weaker. Now, you are still paying only 420 gold for Wind's Fury. That's not too bad. It's also a cheaper item overall, right? And in general, cheaper items are better than they were before the season update, because you get mythic passives, and you're getting, 150 gold-ish per mythic passive. So, getting that passive on a little bit sooner is of some value. Is Hurricane overall a weaker item? I mean, kind of, yeah, right? They reduced the cost by 100, they reduced the crit chance by 5, they reduced the move speed by 2. Like, this is generally speaking a nerf. When you look at things like rapid fire cannon, that's, those items did not get nerfed by as much. In fact, in some cases they got buffed because, we recently saw like Riot buffed rapid fire cannon in terms of it being cheaper, right? So Hurricane kind of got left out to dry. It didn't gain the benefit the other Zeal upgrades did. Like, if they had went and nerfed lowered Hurricane to 3,200 gold before this and then did this kind of change, there's... Hurricane may still be left out to dry a little bit here. Now, I'm still a fan of Hurricane. I think it's a good item. Playing 400 for this passive is not bad. Like, to be clear, like, this is still a pretty solid item. I'm a big fan of it, as I said before. So I don't think this is too bad, but, it is objectively in and of itself a slightly weaker item. And then finally, the next change that comes in here is Sunfire Aegis. In pick rate and win rate is dominating other tank mythic choices, so they are lowering the damage output, right? They lowered its health, so that it was the squishiest of all the items. It's still just contributing a bit too much damage, so here's the numbers before and after. Obviously, just the first tick is the exact same, but then as time goes on, it does less and less and less damage. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7% less damage overall. We can add a decimal for fun. Pretty clean. So, Sunfire does up to 7% less damage, which is pretty meaningful. I'm glad there's, more follow-up tank nerfs. Tanks are still, as a class, overperforming. I'm also glad we get somewhat cleaner numbers than 72% bonus damage. One thing to point out is this is the number that's being used on the, on-attack immolate thing. It's not called immolate, but whatever it's actually called, the, scorch or whatever it really is. That's going to be felt, right? This is a pretty substantial damage down. 7% less in the persistent damage, 7% less in the on-attack burn. This is a fairly big nerf for Sunfire Aegis, which will do a lot to put tanks in the right spot. Also, the more they nerf Sunfire Aegis, the more you can actually make a choice across doing, Iceborne or, Turbo Chem Tank or whatever. So, fan of these changes. This is good stuff. Pretty small patch overall, so no TLDR here, but I think all these changes make sense. I think they're all aimed well. Some might be too small, like, potentially Anivia is too small of a nerf, but overall, pretty happy with this one. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.